adults would be. Wellbeing is a major contributor to quality of life, and it's both subjective and objective in that it's about what the child or the young person thinks or feels around their own well-being, as well as the measurable conditions of that child's life. And it's holistic. So coming back to, it's not just mental health or social emotional well-being or physical health. We need to ensure we've got this holistic lens on to gain that really rich picture of what's going on for that child or that young person across all aspects of well-being. And how we do that is through the NEST, which is our well-being framework for children and young people, which Petty mentioned earlier. And the NEST has been around now for a while. It's developed in 2012. It took a couple of years to be created, and it was done in partnership with 150 organisations around Australia. So it wasn't just a racy creating this thing. And it was also developed including the voices of thousands and thousands of children and young people around the country as well. Some people online tonight might be familiar with the New Zealand Wellbeing Framework for Children and Young People. It was released last year, and Racy consulted with the New Zealand government when they were doing that process, and you will be able to see a lot of similarities between their wellbeing framework and the NEST. So although it's been around for a while now, it still remains current and valid. The NEST is not an acronym, refreshingly so. The NEST is actually referring to a nest, and that came about from one of the young people that was involved in the process, and it was one of the final workshops in this 2-year process, and they were describing or presenting on the 6 areas of well-being. And the young person stood up and said, it's like if each of these 6 areas are supported, then we can be happy and healthy and fly from the nest. So what actually are these 6 areas of well-being that came from hundreds and hundreds of experts and thousands of children and young people? And this is in no particular order of importance. Material basics, so that's referring to having secure, appropriate, stable housing, having the home that's not too hot, not too cold, appropriate clothing, access to nutritional food, clean water, access to green spaces, and so forth. Feeling valued, loved, and safe. So is that child or that young person feeling valued by their teachers? Are they feeling loved by their family? Are they safe in all environments, in home, at school, in the community, online? Healthy, and that encompasses physical health, mental health, and emotional health. And having a positive sense of identity and culture. So that's important regardless of your ethnicity or background, but particularly important for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here in Australia. Learning refers to any and all time learning. So not learning in just that formal classroom type setting, learning at home in the community, that's where parent engagement or family engagement comes in, maximising learning opportunities anywhere, anytime. And participating. So that's about kids having a say in matters, having a voice in decisions that affect them, and being part of groups, clubs, societies, whether that be in person or online. So those are the 6 areas of well-being that make up the nest. And the nest is a good analogy in that way that you can see if one of these areas is weak, if there's gaps in the nest, it's going to weaken that whole structure of the nest. And the converse is true as well. So if there's a very robust and strong area of the nest, then that's going to strengthen the whole structure of the nest as well. So it also shows the overlapping and interconnectedness of these areas. It's not that each topic or area of well-being can slot in, beautifully into these 6 areas. There's a lot of overlap. Certain things can fit into 1, 2, 3, 4 areas. So we need every area of the nest, every well-being area to be supported so that chicks can fly from the nest. These are obviously umbrella labels. There's a lot that sit underneath each of these 6 areas. But one aspect that I need to mention, because it is needed for absolutely all areas of well-being, is responsive relationships. And essentially what that means is that kids need adults who they have a positive and trusting relationship with to ensure that they have good well-being. And I don't think it'll come as a surprise for anyone online here that one of the crucial ways to establish and maintain positive and trusting relationships is through communication, or good communication, I should say. So that's where the common approach comes into play. The common approach, the definition here is on your screen, is a flexible way of working to help everyone have quality conversations with young people and their families about all aspects of their well-being. Really, it's yarning. It's best practice conversations about well-being and about all aspects of their well-being. So it's all 6 areas of well-being that we just talked about in the nest. And it's to help everyone. So we're not just talking about social workers or people. There's no prerequisite to learning how to use the common approach. In a school example, we would train the front desk administrators, the educators, the leadership and executive team, the footy coaches, essentially any adult who could potentially have a positive and trusting relationship with a young person can be trained in the common approach, because kids talk to people they trust. So we need to ensure that whatever adult that child is talking to, they're equipped to have the skills to be able to have best practice conversations about well-being so that they know how to respond in the best way. What the common approach is not is an assessment of any type. It's not about scoring. It's not about diagnosing or meeting certain criteria. It's not a risk assessment tool. It is really about, it's a conversation. It's that conversation that you ideally are having prior to then having, if you need, a standardized assessment. And if you're using the common approach correctly, you would be having regular common approach conversations. And the only time the common approach is not appropriate is in a crisis situation. And that's for obvious reasons. If something's going on and that child or that family is going through a crisis, then that's the thing that needs the focus. The common approach does take time. It's holistic. It helps to reduce the chances or the likelihood of further crises happening. But within a crisis situation, it's not to be used. So you wouldn't be having a common approach conversation in an accident and emergency clinic, for example. So what the common approach does is, that's lovely, kids centered there, Penny. What the common approach does is allow a common language. So, as an adult, navigating the various environments and contexts and services, systems, there's jargon and there's acronyms and there's a lot of exclusive language going on because there's a lot of different phrases being used depending on who you're talking to. And the common approach just cuts through that and provides common language. And by doing that, it also provides a common understanding around what well-being actually is. And by doing that, it is really empowering. One thing I just absolutely love about the common approach is that it allows children and young people and families to not only understand what well-being is as a concept, but to really understand what well-being means for them in this present moment, what is working well for them, and how can those areas of what's working well help their areas of need. It's a really empowering experience. And the more people that are using the common approach, the more that these kids are having a more consistent experience. So, you know, the more common it becomes, the more they're getting this experience of having the same language spoken back to them, and that understanding being built up there. It's really a capacity building approach. And they're also having a more positive experience because these adults know how to respond in the best way. So what the common approach is made up of are 4 practices. These are not radically new. I'm sure they are familiar with everyone attending tonight. They are child-centered, so ensuring that you're putting yourself in that child's shoes. How does the world look like from their eyes? It's being strengths-based. What is going well? What can that child or that family do? It's holistic, and so that's referring to those 6 areas of the nest, considering all aspects of that child's well-being. And working in partnership is the last practice. So that's a bit of a 2-part practice in the way that we talk about working in partnership with both the child and their family themselves, but also working in partnership with any other adult who is involved in that child's life. And that, you know, as Eugene mentioned, I was a speech pathologist for 15 years, and that's something I'm sure a lot of people here tonight can agree with, that we as a society are very poor at, in terms of having meaningful communication between everyone who's involved in that child's life. So parents and educators and any specialists and anyone else who is part of that child's life. So that's that second part of the last practice there, working in partnership. So generally, these 4 practices are, they're best practice. There's a lot of evidence that sit under every single one of these. They are found in a lot of teams or organizational guidelines or mission statements, or what individuals aspire to do. But I've trained thousands of people in the common approach now over more than 5 years, and not one person has been able to say to me that, yes, I am child-centered, strengths-based, holistic, and collaborative every day with every child that I work with or see. And that's not surprising. We're human. So what the common approach does is allow you to more consistently work in alignment with all 4 of these practices every day. And you can use the common approach anywhere and any time, because it really, you're just having a yarn, remember. So if you are working in these ways, you are using the common approach. But to help you remember and remind yourself about what these practices actually mean and what are those 6 areas of well-being, because that's the holistic practice, we have common approach resources. And the well-being wheel that you can see here is the crux of the resources, the foundation of the resources. So you can see it takes an ecological frame here, with the child in the center, the child in the family environment, and then the child in the community context. So inner ring, middle ring, and outer ring. And then you'll recognize the 6 areas of well-being around the outside that we spoke about in the nest. And the text that is inside each of the segments, the high-level indicators or discussion points, the prompts, the starting points about what could potentially be in each of those areas of well-being. So again, there's a lot more that sit underneath every aspect, each domain, but these are just sort of reminders. And there's different resources that cover different things, which I'll show you in a second. But this is what we call the wellbeing wheel. And depending on what your situation is, so how are you having these conversations with a child or a young person? Are they on the footy field? Are they in a hallway? They might be at a desk. If so, you could pull out a resource. I'm going to show you this, which is just an overview of other resources to give you an idea. So there's posters at different sizes, and they're used in various ways, like in hallways or in waiting rooms and etc. But the question booklets I really want to point out and pull out as a separate resource, because these resources we just get phenomenal feedback. I don't think there must be any other resource quite like it in Australia. So there's question booklets that are both designed for young people, and then there's question booklets for parents or carers. And you can see on the screen there, the one that you can see that says loved. So that's one of the sample pages of one of the question booklets. And each page covers one of the wellbeing areas. And the question up there says, I feel like I fit in at school. And then the answer is not really, some of the time, all of the time. And that's a good one, because that is under valued, loved and safe, but actually as a question could fit under learning, it could fit under positive sense of identity and culture, it could fit under participating. So it's a nice example of they're not separate and distinct areas. And it also provides an example of how these are not assessments. There's no score to be had here. You don't even need to write on that resource if you don't want to. If you do, then a child could mark it or circle it or show it somehow. And there's, I'll just give you one example of how these are used, because I've used in multiple ways. But the one I like the most, I think, is that the parents and carers are given their version of this question booklet. The child is given their version, and they're told to go home and do it separately. And this is from a service in Adelaide, actually. And they have got something like 90-something% response rate, what I think is amazing to start with. And then they use the question booklets as a basis of discussion. So they work through page by page and then talk about the differences and compare how the parent filled it out versus how that child filled it out. And that's how they work through. I think I've got a 12-week program for this particular service. But it's been used in schools. Whole classes can complete it. And the common approach is it can be used in so many different ways. I'll give you one more example and then I'll stop talking. Throw it back to you, Eugene. But it's all about understanding all the aspects of wellbeing and ensuring that we're being strengths-based, child-centered, collaborative and holistic when we're talking about wellbeing. And so in an early childhood centre setting, this was down in Tasmania actually, and I love this. For their open days, for when the families come in and they'll be starting next term or they want to check out the centre, they set up 6 different stations in their centre, and each station represents an area of wellbeing. So material basics is a dollhouse, healthy is the kitchen with cut up fruit, participating was a dance floor area with music. And you get the idea. And there was a staff member based at each station, and the parents and the child would go around each station, and the staff member would talk to them about what this area of wellbeing means and represents, and what it would mean for their child at their age and stage. And it was just such a beautiful example of the common approach being used at a group level, not at an individual. It's not just needing to be a one-on-one conversation. It can be a whole initiation into a setting or an environment or into what wellbeing means. So deliver training in the Common Approach, and I'll throw back to you, Eugene.
Hey, thank you, Rebecca. That's a great presentation, and I've got lots of questions, and I just remind the audience, of which there are many of you, to just write your questions down if you do have them. For me, I'm really interested in moving from the model into practice, and particularly in the early childhood education and care sector, but not primarily. But when people are trained in this model, what are you seeing in terms of the change in their practice, and what stories can you share that demonstrate the impact that the model has?
Yeah, sure. So that example I mentioned before in terms of
Yeah.
having those different stations,
Yeah.
really allowed the parents to feel more welcome, to feel more inclusive, and from the get-go had a positive benefit on the relationships between families and educators. So right from the start, they had and this is anecdotal because we do want to try and get some more robust evaluation going on, but from what the educators have told us, that there was a definite change in terms of having open and positive communication between educators and families.
Great. And Penny, if I come to you, I mean, you've overseen, I guess, the development of the model, well, at least within Eracy. Are you seeing, what advantages are you seeing from the model, and where do you see it going in terms of, I'm thinking of the wider reform of the sector as a whole, but how do you see it playing a role in that space?
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to tell a case study story as well, and I very rarely talk on approach without giving this case study, and Rebecca's smiling because she knows exactly the story I'm going to tell, because I always tell this one, and because it's really good.
It's a good one.
Going back into South Australia, we've done a lot of this work in South Australia, so a lot of our stories are South Australian. We heard this from a senior member of a school community, and she had been away. She'd come back into her deputy principal role at a school, and discovered that a young boy had moved to the school. He'd been removed from his biological mum and placed with his biological dad, so child protection situation. The family had moved out of metropolitan Adelaide to a regional area in Fresh Start for everybody. The child was, generally relatively well adjusted, but school had noticed some problems with behaviour, largely around aggressive play in the playground and some inattention in the classroom, difficulties in just being still and staying focused on classroom activities. They tried a lot of things. They'd done all of their behaviour modification programs that the school used. They'd, had started to have conversations around getting the child an assessment from a paediatrician. This deputy principal returned to the school and said, look, what I'd like to do, she'd been trained in the Common Approach, was to actually have some conversations with the kid and their dad to try and figure out what was sort of the drivers behind the behaviour. Long story short, lots of conversations, because as Rebecca said, this is not something that happens as a single conversation. It's best when it's implemented in a trusting relationship where, you have a series of conversations. They were able to draw some really interesting conclusions about this child and their circumstances. So at the end of the day, the child's aggressive behaviour on the playground was really driven by the fact that at his previous school in metropolitan Adelaide, they'd had a contact sports policy. They could play contact sports during their breaks. At the new school, they couldn't. Nobody had really explained this to the child particularly well, and they were, a sport crazy kid who wanted to be doing lots of physical contact. Instead of, getting the child assessed, the school actually paid for a sporting club membership for that child and for his dad, so that he could get the physical outlet that he needed. There was also a benefit to that around increasing the social inclusion for that family in a new community, and the behaviour at school was addressed. You can't do physical contact at school. Here's to go and play on the sports field, do it out there, problem solved. Inactivity, inattentiveness in the classroom, actually, through the conversations, they were able to ascertain that this child had actually been a half sibling to two other siblings that had been in the household. for some reason, the system had not actually let this kid know where his half siblings were. He had actually taken on a really caring and protective role for those half siblings, and he was concerned about what was happening to them in his absence. He'd been moved, he'd gone to live with his dad, he lived in this nice new town, life was pretty good, he had a good school, but he didn't know what had happened to his half siblings. Nobody had actually given him any information, and that was fine while he was busy, while he was engaged in sport and the things he was actually particularly interested in. But when he was in the classroom and he was just struggling to be, you know, attentive and to focus, that's when these things played on his mind. And so again, really simple, very inexpensive solution. The school facilitated a fortnightly Skype with the school where the half siblings were now located. What had manifested as really complex behaviour problems actually weren't. They were actually just really interesting aspects of this kid's life that you don't get if you have routine conversations, if you don't sort of really go below the surface and actually ask all that holistic conversation around wellbeing, if you don't understand fully the life of the child or the family that you're working with. And the deputy principal, and I know you've got some medical practitioners online this evening, but I know the deputy principal of that school likes to tell a story that no paediatricians were harmed in the preparation of that anecdote, because you know, it really was not a medical solution. It wasn't a solution to a problem through drugs or through behavioural therapy or anything like that. They were actually really simple solutions. And I think, to go back to your first point about what does this mean for the system more largely, you know, we know that we work in a system there with many competing demands. There are lots of aspects of bringing up children and working around improving outcomes for children in community that are really resource intensive, and they take a lot of the resources that we've got, and we could be investing lots and lots of money, but the chances are sometimes we could be investing them in the wrong things. And I think for me, and I put my systems lens hat on for a while, I actually think that I wonder whether if we looked at more simple solutions around improving things like quality of conversations, whether we could actually free up some resources for some of the things that we know are actually resource intensive and really require it.
Yeah, so while you were talking there, I was just thinking about, the commons model is a very strength-based model, and that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, of course, is child protection, and the amount of cost that goes into child protection services, whether it's out of home care or whatever it might be, as well as the emotional cost of removing children from their biological parents. Can this model actually open up? I'm guessing it might be a rhetorical question, but I'm going to ask you both. Can this open up conversations that may actually divert the trajectory of children into the child protection system?
Absolutely, and it has. So
Okay.
what the common approach is doing is being a true preventative approach. Yeah. And we are catching emerging issues or potential issues because people are using the common approach. Right. So it's really shifting that focus and the resources from that crisis and statutory, tertiary level to it's inverting the pyramid. So then, those resources are going back into that early intervention, prevention, universal space. Yeah. And it really is universal. So one thing I didn't do my rant. Oh, you'll be very pleased to know that a rant is coming, everyone. So I have a rant about why the common approach is not a tool. And there's a reason I rant about this, because if it's a tool, then we are making a judgment on that child or that young person or that family and looking in our toolbox to bring out whatever tool we think is the best to use in that moment in time. And the common approach is not a tool because we're not making any judgments. It's not about they're getting common approach because they've an naughty kid in the class or they've met this criteria, so I need to have a common approach conversation. Absolutely every child should and can be having common approach conversations all of the time. It's a very non-stigmatizing approach. It's the same conversations are happening, the same practices are being used with every child and young person in family. And if that is happening, then that's where true prevention occurs.
I guess I would add to that you know, the child protection system is complex, and I think we would be doing ourselves short if we didn't sort of acknowledge the complexity that exists within the child protection systems, you know, in each jurisdiction in Australia, and the complexity of being a part of that system, both as a mandatory reporter and as, you know, foster care or reunification processes or whatever parts of that child, even in the prevention and early intervention space, whatever part of that system we're working in, we really acknowledge that it's complex. Rebecca spoke about inverting the pyramid, and you know, it's something that Racy's been writing about for a really long time, this notion of, you know, shifting investment away from tertiary, you know, responses to those prevention and early intervention tool resources, approaches. I didn't use tools, all of those bits. But we also acknowledge that, you know, for, you know, a period of time, you have to have your attention on both. You can't just flip your pyramid and think the problems are going to go away. We know that there are, you know, many families who are existing in extreme adversity, you know, and what the common approach allows us to do is to better understand that adversity. And again, it's not a judgmental thing. Adversity is not something that is, you know, predetermined or pre-created. There are lots of levers in play that create the adverse circumstances that many families find themselves in. And I think what this tool, I did it again, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. What this approach does is actually allows us to acknowledge that, to actually say, you know, you're experiencing some adversity at the moment that is difficult, and what this helps do is you know, help parents and help educators and help whoever it is who's working in those with children and their families to actually understand that adversity, and to, you know, if a response is needed, if something needs to be done, to do the best response that they can.
Yeah, great. We do have questions from the audience, and I do want to acknowledge the audience and thank you for being online and being here today. One question is, can people watch this webinar after this? And yes, it's going to be on the Healthy Australia YouTube channel. I provided the link in the chat, and I'll provide that again post this session. There is a question about the term well-being from Emma Rowell, who asks, do you think the term well-being has longevity, or does it feel on trend at present?
I'll start, and then Penny, you can add. So with the wellbeing framework for children and young people, the NEST that we spoke about earlier, that was started to being developed in 2010. So that's already a decade ago. And I know that, yeah, there are some certain groups that are not favouring wellbeing as a word. But well-being as a concept is not going anywhere. We need that to live good lives.
Yeah, great.
The only thing I would add is that, you know, because of that holistic nature of it, it's more than health. It's more than all of the other domains that we've spoken about. And even when you consider those domains as individual priorities, it's more than the sum of those parts as well. So I would be, you know, I like the term wellbeing. I take the point that, you know, it has been taken and used and possibly used out of context by various groups. It's something that we are passionate about.
Yeah, great. Okay, now some people have raised their hands, and I don't know how to deal with hands raised. So if you've got a question, put it in the Q&A box at the bottom panel, and then we'll go there. And also people ask what time we will finish. We're going to finish at 8 o'clock, so just people are aware of that. There is a question here about the resource kit and how much it costs, and how do people access training, and what do they want to, how do they go about accessing that training, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually in the process of, in this COVID world, transitioning to an online, or mostly it'll be a hybrid delivery, training delivery mechanism. So looking at the new year, we'll be having that opportunity for people to do self-paced online modules, and then it will be between a 2 or 3 hour virtual workshop. We'll get together as a group and do some activities online. So if people are interested, then I'd say that the best course of action would be to sign up for the Racy newsletters, and maybe we could send out the link, Eugene, to
Yes.
registrants
Yeah.
to do that. It's a free newsletter that comes every week, and that'll be the best way to get that information for when that training is available.
Yeah, so I'll be sending out an email tomorrow, or what day is it today? Wednesday or Thursday, by this week anyway, with the links to the YouTube channel and any other links that we promised to provide. I mean, Sally does. Sorry,
I'll just add there, Eugene. So in terms of the resource kit training, you need to have done the training to access the resource kit.
Right. Okay.
So there is a reason why we ask people to do the training. It is not just about the resources themselves, it is about the practices. So that training is needed to ensure it's been used in conjunction with the practices.
Okay, great, thank you. We do have a question here about families with babies and toddlers, and whether the model can be used for families when the children can't communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, in terms of the resources, we've got simplified wellbeing wheels, so more the toddler age, or preschool sort of age, for kids to draw on in terms of what each of those areas mean to them. But in having common approach conversations, it's really talking to the parents about that, and it doesn't matter what age the child is, you can have common approach conversations with parents and families, and within that talking about how, especially young babies, how they do communicate, and you can read a lot from non-verbal small humans. Okay.
The question that I have is about is it an Antipodean model, or is this model used elsewhere around the world?
So at the moment it's only Australia, but we have plans for global domination. We were actually approached a couple of years ago. Finland, of all countries, approached us around common approach. They were doing a reform in their health and human services area, and were interested in the common approach and how that might be adopted in that country. So we went through a number of consultations with them, and then surprise, surprise, the government changed and it was bogged, and it fell off the radar. But just the fact that a Scandinavian country of all countries saw the value of it, I think speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Something I haven't mentioned actually is that the common approach has been independently evaluated by the Social Policy Research Centre. So it's not just a racy saying this is awesome. We know it works. We know it does what it's designed to do.
Okay. Penelope Clark asked, how long does the training actually take?
Yeah, good question. Well, at the moment, it's a one-day workshop, but with the online training, that's to be confirmed. As I said before, it'll be 2 to 3 hours in a virtual workshop, and then a few hours online self-paced modules.
Okay, great, thank you. And Sujata Dalvi asked, can this training be done individually?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, because we're in a bit of a transition period, but what we are hoping for is that the online modules can be done anytime, and then there'll be certain regular dates for the virtual workshops, but you don't need to come with a group. There'll be a group formed around you.
Okay, great. Okay, so look, we're coming towards the end of the session. So there was an ask, can the slides be shared with us tonight? But the slides will be on the video of the webinar. So again, I'll send that link once that's up, and then people can have access to that information on that channel. So before we do close, I wanted to give both of you, Penny and Rebecca, an opportunity just for some final thoughts about the model specifically, but also anything around where we're going in the early childhood education and care space. Because it does seem like an exciting opportunity at the moment in Australia, and I wonder whether this might be an opportunity to ignite some of that enthusiasm. So I'm going to start with Penny and go to you for your final thoughts, Penny.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. I think you're right. I think it's very interesting. If it was a bad thing, I'd call it a perfect storm right at the moment, but it's not a bad thing. So I think it's a perfect something. There is lots of really interesting things happening in the early childhood education and care space, particularly. I think the work that Jay Weatherall and Minderoo Foundation are doing through Thrive by 5 to actually, whether you agree with the vision for universally affordable ECEC or not, the fact that we're now having a conversation as a nation about whether this is something that should be a priority, I think is fantastic. I think again, without party affiliations or the politics of it, I think the fact that the opposition leader stood up in Parliament and talked about, he said childcare. I'm not going to do that because it's not the language that I would prefer to use, but talked about the early education and care as an investment in our future, and we need to spend money now in order to be able to create opportunities for parents to work now. But we also have to think about the powerful impacts this can have on the children that we're growing up right at the moment. So for the future, the fact that we're talking about these things on the floor of Parliament is new. That's exciting. I think that conversation is really important. I think, and I'm sure you have got some early years educators on the line this evening, and this would be my shout out to that workforce. They do such important work. They are the engine room of young Australia, I think, and I think wherever possible we should make an acknowledgement of the powerful contribution that workforce makes. So I think it's an exciting time. I think if people want to be part of those conversations nationally, there's heaps of opportunities through the work Jay's doing. But I would encourage you as an area, as a group who already come together to engage in things, to have the conversations as a community of practice, and ride the wave, because I think that we're going to do some interesting things in early years education in the very, very next little while in this country, and be a part of it.
Yeah, it's exciting times. And Rebecca, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on what Penny said around childcare, and that really brings a nice alignment to the common approach, and that language does matter. And using this common approach language really does make a difference to the children and the young people and the families that you work with. And one of the conversations I have almost every time I deliver training is around people who really get this and understand the importance and value of it, but the structure or the system or their manager or their environment that they're in is not conducive to using something like the common approach. Yeah. And there's potential to change that, and there is change happening. And I just encourage everyone to keep questioning and keep asking and keep advocating for the need to work in this holistic way, because it's the way of the future, and it's the way that we're going to get better and evolve as a society.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Rebecca. So thank you both. I would like to thank both Penny Dakin and Rebecca Goodhue for the time which they have literally gifted to us today. So thank you for giving us your time and sharing your insights and the model. It's been I've really enjoyed learning about the whale of wellbeing. I can't get my words out. Before we do finish, I do want to make a plug for the next webinar, which is going to focus on adverse childhood experiences. And we're lucky enough to have Jay Weatherall, Michael McAfee, Julie Sturgis is the CEO of the Primary Health Network, Zoe Robertson, who is the advocate for youth and children in New South Wales, and Ian Hickey, who is from the Brain and Mind Institute, to talk about the science of adverse childhood experiences and the art of handling and preventing what they call ACEs and how to respond to those. So that's going to be a very interesting, exciting webinar. So a promotion will be going out with that soon. I just wanted to share that now. So with no further ado, thank you, Penny. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everybody, for staying online and for for attending and listening. I will be putting the links out in an email between now and the end of the week. And if you've got any questions, please email me at hello@healthyaustralia.org. And I'll put that in the chat before we finish, so you've all got the email. It's hello at Healthy Australia.
And thank you, Eugene, for facilitating an opportunity like this. It's been wonderful, and thank you, everyone, for giving up your evening as well. Very precious times.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and we'll end it there.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.